everything seems to be getting more expensive. Rents, food, energy. Last episode, I tried to figure out why our money doesn't seem to go as far anymore. And this episode, I want to figure out something even more useful. What can we actually change in our day-to-day lives when our wallets feel the squeeze? Because let's be honest, budgeting, saving, and planning ahead feel a lot harder when your costs keep rising and your income doesn't keep up. So, if you've ever felt stressed, stuck, or just unsure where to start with money, this episode is for you. Welcome to What the Euro, the podcast where we make sense of the economy, the euro, and the economic decisions shaping our lives. I'm Catherine, and I'm here to unpack the stories you hear about but rarely get explained. So, to help us on our budgeting journey, today I'm talking to Emilie. She is the founder and CEO of Vestpod, a digital community that empowers women through financial education. And she's also the host of the Wallet podcast. So, Emilie, welcome to Euro Matters.
Thank you for having me today.
Pleasure. So, in our last episode, we talked a bit about the difference between our personal inflation rates, like how we experience rising prices, and what we actually see in the news and what the official inflation rate is. And that's kind of all because we have different priorities and we're spending our money on different things. So, Emilie, to kick us off, how have you experienced rising prices in your day-to-day life?
So I think like most people, I've noticed it in everyday spending. So for me, it was really, the weekly food shops that cost more, eating out, traveling, family activities. So you could feel it a little bit everywhere. And I think a lot of these purchases that used to be on autopilot now require a little bit more of a conscious decision.
And what about your followers then? You're involved in the kind of online space. What are they stressing out about money the most?
So in your previous episode, you talked about inflation, cost of living. I think these are really top of mind. So what I hear more is around uncertainty. So when prices are changing, that will affect our purchasing power. So it's harder to plan ahead, I feel, and feel confident about the future. And as we know, money worries are rarely just about money. They can affect our well-being, they can affect our relationship and the way we feel about ourselves. So I feel it's not just the money, but it's also the emotions, behavior, and how we feel.
Yeah, definitely. It's this really kind of overwhelming and emotional thing, often, like you say. Do you think there's something that people might be getting wrong about the cost of living right now?
So I think listening to your previous episode, what people may be getting wrong about the cost of living is that they're thinking about cutting small expenses, and we often hear the advice about skipping the morning coffee or canceling subscriptions, which are great, and they definitely help. But I think for most households, the biggest pressures come from the essential costs, and I'm thinking housing, food, transport, energy, of course, and that's why many people feel financially stretched, even if they're really trying to budget and do the right thing and make more sensible decisions.
Yeah. And also, actually, I think in the last episode, we talked a bit about these kind of external forces, the things that as central banks, what we can do and what we can't do, what we can't control. And I think there's a parallel to be drawn with people and their personal finances. There's certain things that you just can't change, and there's certain small changes that you can do. What do you think in terms of people's mindset has kind of changed in the last few years when it comes to money?
So I think if I look at what I've been doing, a lot of the decisions you were not really thinking about it. You had maybe direct debit on your account, but now when costs are changing, you have to pay more attention. So people may find themselves, reviewing spending more often, maybe comparing prices, or thinking a little bit more about how to balance today's needs versus future goals. And I'm thinking, saving for the long term, investing. So I feel it's a lot about trade-off between what you could afford before and trying to move the money maybe to a different pocket or to a different pot.
Yeah. Just also a quick disclaimer maybe for our listeners, because what we're talking about today isn't personal kind of investment advice. We obviously don't know our listeners' personal financial situations. So if we're giving out kind of tips or any ideas, it's not investment advice. please do your own research before you make any decisions with your money, just to kind of make that important disclaimer. But I think it's really interesting. It's this kind of numbers versus emotions game. It's really emotionally driven sometimes. And what do you think is kind of within our control when things are getting a lot more expensive, and what isn't? I mean, you've touched on it already.
I think that's really interesting because you mentioned emotions, and money isn't just about numbers. It's also how we feel, the decision we make at a certain point in time, how we respond to uncertainty. So there are things outside of our control, and we can control inflation, we can control interest rates, energy prices, or whether our rent, our mortgage actually goes up. But there are things that we can control. And I think it starts with understanding our money, really looking at where our money is going, building some savings, a rainy day fund when we can, making some decisions about spending. So being a little bit more aware about where your money is going and looking for opportunities to increase your income. I think that financial confidence often comes from this distinction. So it's sometimes cutting a little bit of the noise and focusing on yourself. We talk about money is really like personal finances. So really focusing on what can you do for yourself, what is available to you. Unfortunately, we can't control every shock, and that could be shock in the economy, that could be on the stock market. But we can try to put ourselves in a better position to try to cope with them.
Yeah, and often it kind of starts with investing in yourself as well, right? Like you say, this building awareness, building your understanding is always a really helpful first step.
Just to add up on that, I think because we lack a level of financial education, we feel it's really overwhelming and we don't know where to start. So I think educating yourself a little bit about money and like listening to your podcast, but really having a few pointers, really adopting the vocabulary around money and the economy. This is really, really helpful in terms of building confidence.
Yeah, definitely. Where do you see at the moment somewhere where people might actually accidentally be overspending,
I think for me it's around convenience. Convenience spending, I think, is a big one. It's never been easier to spend money. That means online shopping, maybe delivery apps, subscriptions, one-click payment. We have our payment details registered on our phone, on all these websites, all these marketplaces. So we spend without necessarily realizing it. It's not that it's a bad thing to spend on convenience, but the challenge is that it's often quite small amounts that are going to be spread over the month. So it can be quite hard to track, and we can tend to overlook these expenses. So really, it's looking at your account and can you add up all these small amounts and try to have a bigger picture in terms of where your money is actually going.
Yeah. And how do you think when we're making all of these small purchases here and there, and it feels often like there's not much money kind of left at the end of the month, how do we even start beginning to think about saving when it feels like there's nothing to save?
So we often think that, saving is for when we'll have more money or when, we'll get a pay rise. But I would try to switch or slightly reframe how we think about saving. I mean, saving is just putting money aside for future you. It's not a spending, it's putting money, aside for when you need it, for a rainy day. And you don't need a lot of money to start spending, you don't need a lot of money to start saving. And you can change slightly how you save money. So instead of waiting until the end of the month, why don't you put in place a direct debit right at the beginning of the month, or maybe on payday, and start with very small amount? Even €10 a month doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it's really about the habit and building up over time. And savings will compound over time. You will feel better about yourself. You can set yourself some saving goals and have different goals from the short to the medium to the long term.
Absolutely. And I think also these days it's got a lot easier to have access to kind of digital finance and things like this. So, I mean, for me, my online banking gives me an option to kind of round up every purchase I make, and it puts that money into a pocket. And so I don't even need to think about it, but it's going somewhere specific. And I think also having different kind of buckets in your head or in your online banking to know I'm saving for this short-term goal or this medium-term goal. I think the more you can kind of actually think about it really rationally, the better. So circling back to something that you said about kind of cutting back costs, but actually sometimes there's not much we can do to cut back costs, and part of the problem is just increasing your salary, and this is something that's quite difficult to do, right? I always thought that that's something that's typically done a lot more by men than women, that they have this innate confidence to ask for a pay rise. But so when I was doing my research for this episode, I found a few studies that were actually indicating that women nowadays are negotiating their salaries kind of just as much, if not maybe more, than men. But the gender pay gap still exists and there are still issues. So where do you think, what's going wrong, and how can women have better agency to negotiate a higher income?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And as you said, I think for a very long time, the narrative was that women simply needed to negotiate more. But increasingly, we see that women are actually negotiating, but they don't get the same outcome as men. So they may not necessarily get their pay rise or as much money as they would like. So of course, negotiation still matters. Keep negotiating. And it's about, understanding your value, knowing the market rate for your role, being able to, advocate for yourself, finding mentors within the organizations. These are really important skills for everyone and should be top of mind, because as you say, it's always a fine balance, and there's this equation where you need to increase your income and maybe, lower your spending. So you need to be really mindful about income. But when we talk about differences in earnings, especially for women, there are unfortunately often a lot of several structural factors that are involved. It's about carrying responsibilities, career breaks, what is sometimes called also the motherhood penalty, and that can affect earnings over a longer period of time. So it's not only the confidence, but it's also the system that's not always working in favor of women.
And actually, just to follow up on that, does that also get reflected in women's investment habits?
Definitely, because I think one of the biggest issues when we start with a pay gap and women earning less is that will compound over a longer period of time. So if women earn less on average, spend time, out of the workforce, work part-time, this difference will affect how much money they can save, how much money they can invest, and maybe how much money they can put in their pensions. Women also live longer, which means that these retirement savings often need to last longer too. When we talk about investing, women are also investing less than men. They tend to keep also more money in cash. That's maybe because they have a different appetite for risk, or they see risk in a different way. They can think investing can be intimidating, but women are very able. Women are actually great investors, excellent investors. So it's not really about the performance, but more participating in the market. And that's where, again, income matters, reducing the gaps from early on, because the money you didn't put into a saving account, into an investing account in your 20s, in your 30s, won't have the chance to compound over a long period of time. So even if you can start with small amount early on, that will be a massive boost for your long-term savings and investments.
Wow, super interesting. So to kind of shift to a slightly different topic and circle back to this idea of saving and kind of cutting costs and dealing with the cost of living, I think one thing that's really prevalent at the moment is this social pressure. And we're invited to, weddings or holidays or even just like group dinners, events with friends. How do we kind of, deal with that pressure to keep up socially when money is tight, or when you've got certain savings goals and you need to meet them? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think with money, sometimes we need to take a step back and thinking that money is not just numbers. Money is very emotional. Very often it's, we don't always make rational decisions with money. It's often influenced by how we feel. We compare ourselves to others. We want to belong. And sometimes we use money as a tool to change the way we feel when we're stressed, maybe when we're bored, anxious. We want to celebrate something, or, we avoid this feeling of missing out. So, social pressure is coming into this, and you talked about maybe weddings, group holidays, going out for dinner, but it also shows up online. We tend to spend, time on, social media. So it's not like we're comparing ourselves with our neighbors. We're comparing ourselves with the whole world. And we expose to other people's lifestyles, and we're really encouraged to spend impulsively. So that's where you can set boundaries for yourself. So looking at maybe alternatives, working on your money mindset, really trying to think, what are your beliefs around money? Why have you been spending recently on some items? And trying to find the reason. That's not easy because we acquire our money habits from a very young age, from age 3 to 7 years old. So it's trying to think about, what was our approach to money at this time? What have we been exposed to? It's also worth remembering that the people around us may be facing similar pressures. We don't talk about money, so very often we try to sense how are people feeling and making these decisions. But it's about being a little bit more comfortable around opening up about money. And ultimately, I would say spending should reflect maybe your values, your priority, and your own financial situations, and not trying to fit in or maybe to impress others. But again, that's really a work in progress, and that's not easy.
Wow. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's easy to feel really overwhelmed, like faced with all of these decisions. What would you say to our listeners? What's one kind of simple thing they could do this week to feel a bit more in control about money?
So I would say after listening to this podcast, maybe set 15 minutes aside. You just need a notebook, maybe your banking app, and just take a quiet time, maybe with coffee, whatever, and look at where has your money been spent over the last month, maybe looking at your income, trying to put all your financial affairs in one place. You don't need to have complicated spreadsheets, but it's maybe allowing or allocating some time, like a mini money date with yourself, maybe every week or every month, just to make sure you keep track. Because awareness is like such a big thing, and it's going to be such a win for you to build financial confidence and slowly get better with money. No one is bad at money. It's just that, we haven't been learning about it, and it's never top of our priority list, unfortunately.
Nice. I'm going to start doing a money date now as well. So to finish off, can we do a round of quick fire questions? So what's the best 20 euros you can spend right now?
I would probably invest these 20 euros. That may come as a surprise, but you can start investing with very small amount of money. And remember that with investing, it's riskier than saving money and putting it on a saving account. But you want to beat inflation over a long period of time. So by taking a little bit more risk, you expect a higher return. And now you can investing with small amounts of money.
Yeah. What about the most overrated financial guidance?
Oh, that was a tricky one. I would say wait until you're earning more or have more money. Usually, it's our first jobs. We get quite early in our career. We may have, student loans. We may have debt, and we feel maybe saving, investing is not for us. I would say just start building your financial confidence, start learning about money, read some books, listen to some podcasts, maybe meet a financial advisor, and try to think about what are the small things I can do for myself. So just, learn and get started.
Nice. And is there a little luxury that you would happily splurge on, even if it's something that's not very essential?
It's kind of essential, but I would say childcare, babysitting, anything that would give me some time back to maybe, go out, see my friends, go to the theater, any live music or dance. I would happily spend money on that.
Definitely. Time is money. What about one money habit that kind of actually works without fail?
So something you can start straight away is automating your savings and investments. It removes the need to make the same decision again and again, and it's building a small habit. So turning intention into a habit.
Nice. Okay, thank you so much, Emilie. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's been really great having you on the podcast, having such a nice conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And that's all for today's episode of What the Euro. Quick reminder, this wasn't personal financial advice, just tips and ideas to help you make sense of your own situation. Don't forget to do your own research before making any decisions. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to the Euro Matters podcast and drop a comment or send us a DM on Instagram to let us know what you want us to cover in future. Until next time, thanks for listening.